I missed you so much, sweetheart.
I knew you'd come back.
She hasn't laughed like that since her father died. Until him HFY Sci-Fi. The palace had been silent for 3 years. Not the absence of sound. There were servants, guards, the mechanical hum of life support systems, the ambient noise of a civilization continuing to function. But the silence of joy had settled over the Imperial Palace of Thessala like a permanent fog, and no one knew how to dispel it. My name is David Foster, and I was about to break 3 years of silence with a simple game. I'd been assigned to the Thessalan palace as a diplomatic liaison. My official purpose was to strengthen human-alien relations and monitor the trade agreements. My actual purpose, according to the briefing, was to make the Empress feel less alone. King Alderaan had died 3 years ago. A sudden illness that the best medical technology in the known galaxy couldn't prevent. The grief had shattered the royal family, but none more than the youngest, Princess Aria, who had been barely more than an infant when she lost her father. Aria hadn't laughed since. The psychological evaluations were clinical, thorough, and deeply sad. The child showed no signs of developmental trauma, no behavioral issues. She was intelligent, curious, responsive to positive stimuli. But somewhere deep in her young biology, she had locked away the capacity for joy. Empress Miranda, her mother, was a study in royal control. I could see the grief in her eyes, the way her hands would occasionally reach for something that wasn't there, the slight tremor in her voice when Aria's name was mentioned. But she maintained the dignity that 10 generations of Thessalan queens had demanded. She ruled. She endured. She did not break. I was warned extensively not to overstep. Not to make promises about the princess's condition. Not to interfere with royal protocols. I ignored all of it. I found Aria in the morning room, a space that caught the earliest light and had somehow remained less oppressed by grief than the rest of the palace. She was sitting quietly, looking out at the gardens with eyes that saw nothing. "Hi," I said, keeping my voice soft. "I'm David." She looked at me with passing interest and then returned to her window. "I just learned something amazing," I said. "And I wanted to show you." I did something that probably violated 17 different protocols. I sat down on the floor. It's a simple thing, a human thing. Adults in my species sit on the floor with children. We make ourselves smaller. We remove the power differential. And I did it in a palace where every architectural element was designed to reinforce hierarchy and distance. Aria's eyes flickered toward me. "Watch this," I said, and I started doing something that I'd learned from my niece back on Earth. I made silly animal sounds and movements. A duck walking. Cat stretching. A dog barking. Simple, ridiculous things designed to make children laugh. Nothing. But her eyes were tracking me now. Kept going. I made the sounds more exaggerated. I moved in ways that must have seemed completely bizarre to a child of an alien species. And then, because I was already committed to breaking every diplomatic protocol in existence, I pretended to fall over and made a groaning sound. Her lips twitched. Just barely. Just enough that I knew something was happening. "Did you see that?" I asked, sitting up. "Did that get a reaction?" She looked at me, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Curiosity. Confusion. The first crack in 3 years of silence. I went back the next day. And the next. And the next. I brought things. A marble that rolled predictably across the floor. She watched it. A puzzle with no real purpose except the satisfaction of making it fit. She tried. A recording of human children laughing from Earth. She listened, her head tilted in confusion at a sound she'd never heard before. Night talk. Not about her father, not about grief, not about any of the things that the palace had decided were too difficult to mention. Talked about Earth, about the ocean, about storms and sunshine, about how on my planet, children would play in water and get completely soaked and it was considered fun instead of a disaster. Took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of me sitting on the floor, making ridiculous sounds, telling absurd stories, refusing to treat her like a princess who needed to be protected from joy, instead treating her like a child who needed to remember how to play. I was demonstrating how humans could wiggle their ears, which I cannot actually do, when her entire face changed. She laughed. It started as a small thing, a sound that her tiny body almost didn't know how to make. But then it grew. Her laugh was like bells, like wind chimes, like everything that had been silent for 3 years suddenly speaking at once. She laughed until she had to catch her breath. And then she did something that probably violated about 30 more protocols. She grabbed my hand. "Again," she said. "Do the ear thing again." I did it 17 more times, and each time she laughed like it was the most hilarious thing in the universe. That's when Empress Miranda came into the room. I don't know how long she'd been watching. Long enough to see her daughter laugh. Long enough for that to register. Her expression shifted from composed, controlled authority to something raw and broken and then, slowly beginning to heal. "Your Majesty," I said, standing quickly, still holding Aria's small hand. She didn't speak. She crossed the room and knelt beside her daughter, an action that probably violated more protocols than I'd already broken, and pulled Aria into her arms. And then the Empress of Thessala, the woman who had ruled with flawless dignity through 3 years of devastating grief, began to cry. Aria, confused but understanding that her mother needed her, wrapped her small arms around Empress Miranda's neck. "The human made me laugh, Mother," she said. "The human made funny ears." Miranda looked at me over her daughter's shoulder, and in her eyes I saw something shift. The beginning of understanding that grief doesn't have to be permanent. That joy doesn't diminish the memory of those we've lost. It honors them. 3 months later, I was officially reassigned to a new position. My work on Thessala was complete. But on my last day, Aria gave me a drawing she'd made. A stick figure with exaggerated ears, smiling with a giant smile. And in the corner, in Empress Miranda's handwriting, "Thank you for reminding us how to live."